Colleen Weiler. I'm the RICOS Fellow for Orca Conservation with WDC, Whale and Dolphin Conservation, which means that I primarily work on conservation initiatives for wild orca populations. So we are going to be kind of switching tacks a little bit here and switch over to talking about wild orcas. So the little cards I handed out are, I'm going to keep kicking that over. Little cards I handed out are, again, like I said, not relevant or not related to the talk I'm going to give, but they are very much in the spirit of Superpod, and we'll revisit those at the end. But what I am going to talk about today is the ecosystem approach, which is potentially the future for endangered species recovery. So let's start by defining what the ecosystem approach is. Also called integrated recovery. It includes the living and non-living elements of different ecosystems and the interactions between them. As it applies to conservation, its goal is to protect the key functions and processes in an ecosystem and incorporate the biological and environmental variation and linkages and focus on repairing those processes and connections, and keeps in mind that humans too are a part of our ecosystem, and how do humans fit in and how can we benefit from a healthy and vibrant environment and habitat. And it also treats the causes versus the symptoms of environmental degradation when it comes to conservation. Now, this is not a new idea. It actually took start in the 1980s under the term restoration ecology, which was an approach to restoring and repairing endangered or damaged ecological systems, keeping in mind all those links and processes. And it takes root in actually the Endangered Species Act, which recognized the importance of ecosystems and habitats to listed species, and also in the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which recognized that even marine mammals, we need to protect the essential habitat features that were important to their survival and just their environment in general. And how do whales fit into that ecosystem? We all love whales, we're preaching to the choir here, but they are more than just a pretty face, they're more than just things to love. They are important to healthy ecosystems and to the environment that they live in. They are ecosystem engineers, they help in nutrient cycling, oxygen production, carbon sequestration, and in reducing atmospheric carbon dioxide. So it's important to remember, yes, we all love whales, we want to save whales, but for more than the fact that they're just amazing, really cool creatures, they're very important to having healthy oceans, which in turn is very important to us. So focusing in on the southern residents as a part of the ecosystem out here in the Salish Sea, they are endangered whales for a variety of reasons, starting with live captures in the 60s and 70s, secondary effect of those captures a generation later, a huge decline following a record low of salmon. They were listed in 2005, but that chart and that number has continued to go down. So management actions and recovery efforts since they were listed haven't been enough to reverse the decline of these whales. And even though we've seen 8 new calves in the past year and a half, as Giles mentioned a couple days ago, 8 is the number that we would like to see every year, not just as a baby boom or a record number of calves born. We like to see that continuously happening. And it's important also to remember that with these 8 new calves that have survived, in the same time period, there were 3 additional calves that we know about that did not survive. And any other ones, possibly, we just don't know. And what's happening with these whales? Why are they declining? Why is that bar graph going in the wrong direction? Again, a number of reasons. There's not enough food. There's too many toxins, vessel effects from noise and harassment, and the risk of an oil spill or a disease outbreak. And because of their social nature and their very small population number, if in the catastrophic event of an oil spill were to happen, they would be severely impacted because they're usually close together in a small area, and it would affect a large number of whales. And in recognition of all these threats, they were named a species in the spotlight by the National Marine Fisheries Service in 2015, and they were given a recovery priority of number 1, which I'm going to read a quote directly from that action plan. A recovery priority 1, let me find my quote here, is a species whose extinction is almost certain in the immediate future. So if that doesn't spell doom and gloom for the southern residents, then that's pretty bad. But luckily in that same sentence from Species in the Spotlight, it's a little bit of hope in saying that The management actions, the reasons for decline and the potential management actions are well known, and the recovery potential is high. So we know what we have to do, it's just a matter of doing it. And one of those things is to recognize how much they really depend on Chinook salmon. The southern residents out here are fish eaters, primarily on salmon and even more primarily on Chinook. Up to 80% of their diet is Chinook salmon, and research has shown a correlation between declining Chinook salmon numbers and increasing mortality for the southern residents. So in this really awesome graph that was put together by Center for Whale Research, which you might see again later, it's a very busy graph, there's a lot going on, but basically at the bottom is different runs of Chinook, and you can see that when those go down, mortality for the southern residents, which is across the top, increases. So these whales need salmon. When they don't have salmon, they're more prone to be stressed by all the other threats that are going on, including toxic contamination and being stressed out by vessels. But unfortunately, salmon themselves are also an endangered species, especially Chinook, for a number of reasons for them as well. Hydropower and dams have blocked access to habitat and historic spawning grounds. Remember that salmon are born in rivers, they migrate out to sea where they grow up, and then they come back. They return to their natal rivers to spawn and then die. Great life strategy there. And they are integral parts of the ecosystem from land and rivers out to sea. They have habitat loss both in blocking access and in development. Harvest, there's big salmon fisheries, and hatcheries, which are often used as a band-aid to when dams are built. Hatcheries are also put in to make up for or to compensate for the loss of habitat and salmon by building those dams. They put more fish out, but hatchery fish have a lower fitness, they dilute the gene pool, they're not as robust as the wild populations, so even though hatchery numbers can kind of pad the recovery or the returning salmon numbers a little bit, it's not true recovery for these wild populations. But progress is possible. There is kind of a movement recently to remove dams and restore rivers as part of ecosystem recovery, recognizing that a healthy river does a lot more than just help salmon populations. The Condit Dam on the white salmon was removed in 2011. That was the largest dam removal project in the US until the Elwha dams came down. And we've seen salmon return to both rivers, so we know that this does help salmon populations. And the Klamath Dams, for those of you who were here last year and heard me talk about the Klamath Dams, they are officially scheduled to come down by 2020. Yay! There's probably going to be some lawsuits happening between now and then, but hopefully none of them actually impede the progress. PacifiCorp is the corporation that owns the dams, and they have partnered with the states of California and Oregon to write out a plan and amend the Klamath hydroelectric settlement agreements, which have been in development since 2008. And officially slate those dams for removal. They are not going through the KHSA, which is the Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement, anymore, because that is, dam removal was seen as the barrier to Congress passing that act. So instead they're going through the regulatory process, which means that it will be open for public comment, and we do have an opportunity to make sure that the orcas are considered in that process and remind them of that connection between orcas and salmon. But more is needed. We have the Condit River recovering, we have the Elwha coming back, Klamath on the list, hopefully soon. But the real kicker, the money load, is the Columbia and Snake River. And the Columbia Basin was formerly one of the largest salmon producing systems in the world, definitely the largest on the west coast of North America, and it was the biggest source of Chinook salmon in the world. But these numbers have decreased drastically in the past 150 years since fishing and dams and development started on the Columbia River. And it's been recognized even in the Southern Resident Recovery Plan that the greatest change in their food availability has been the loss of salmon in the Columbia River system. So that is potentially the biggest ecosystem restoration project in the Pacific Northwest. And I saw that Jim is speaking after me, and he's the kind of go-to Snake River guy, so he's going to cover this in much more detail, so I will just skip over it, but just kind of point out the connection between orcas, salmon, and the Columbia River. Those 4 dams that are on the lower Snake River are blocking miles and miles of potential spawning habitat, historic spawning habitat that they once had access to and no longer do. But removing those dams and reopening that river not only has the potential to open up thousands of miles of stream and habitat, but also can be the biggest restoration potential and recovery potential for salmon in the Pacific Northwest. Not to mention the effect on the human population in that same area by recovering jobs in fisheries, recreation potential, and just Jim is going to talk about that, I'm sure. And that was also recognized by Oregon Governor John Kitzhaber a few years ago, almost 16 years ago. So this, again, is not a new idea. The concept of recovering an ecosystem and a river to help local populations. So orcas and salmon are both endangered species, and they both have multiple roles in their ecosystem, which is yet another thing to keep in mind when we're talking about ecosystem potential and recovery. Orcas are those ecosystem engineers that we talked about with whales before. They help in maintaining a healthy environment. They're also an indicator species. If something is wrong with orcas, we see them a lot. We are very aware of where they are and what they're doing. So if they're not doing well, then that's an indicator that something else is going wrong in the ocean environment. Something else is going on. They're also an umbrella species, so protections that are enacted to help orcas have a residual effect on helping other species. Salmon are also they're a kind of a keystone of the Pacific Northwest ecosystem. That connection between rivers and land and sea, they're a foundation of the Pacific Northwest. And both of them are very important to the human element of the ecosystem as well. They support thriving industries in whale watching and recreational fishing, tourism, and they're both historically very important in the area as well. So we can also apply the ecosystem approach to conservation itself by remembering the human dynamic and bringing in all the multiple stakeholders and different people involved and working with everybody together to continue to share the message and make everyone aware of that connection between orcas, salmon, healthy rivers, and healthy ecosystems. Killer whales and salmon actually too bring a new viewpoint to the issue by reminding people of that wide-ranging connection and the fact that these animals are so closely integrated and entwined that they need a larger multi-species long-term approach that treats the causes versus the symptoms of why they're endangered for each species. So we need to remember orcas need salmon, which need rivers, and if you just address one of the problems at a time, as is shown by the last 10 years of management efforts, nothing happens. Those numbers still go down. So we need to remember the connection when we're talking about conservation. So for survival, we need to think about what the salmon need. They need healthy, clean, free-flowing rivers. The orcas need salmon in addition to healthy rivers and ocean environment, freedom to move and freedom from noise and harassment. And what do we need? We need oceans and ecosystems that are healthy and thriving, which whales are a big part of. For more information, this is a lot packed into the slide, but you can always ask me or stay tuned for Jim's talk next. And I always like to end with a joke and keep it light. So what did the salmon say when he hit the wall? Damn. Okay. And to pivot back to the captivity issue and the heart of Superpod, I'm sure you are all aware that in March of this year, SeaWorld announced they were ending their breeding for captive orcas. Yay. But there are still nearly 600 whales and dolphins that are not orcas that are held in captivity in North America. We are currently running a campaign to bring attention to those beings as well and to remind people and SeaWorld that they also need help and need to get out of captivity. So we're asking people to pledge to never participate in a swim with or encounter program for these captive whales and dolphins. That can be, again, I'm sure I'm telling you guys stuff you already know, but it's very stressful for the whales and dolphins. It's a captive setting, and then you're adding more stress by putting strange people in the water with them. So we're gonna do a social media event here, and if they have a pen, if you can sign your pledge and hold them up, I'm gonna take a picture, and then we're gonna share it on the Twitter and the internet and all that stuff. And then I will collect the cards at the end, and we will add those onto our list that we'll submit to various government agencies, animal protection, health inspection services, and the Alliance of Marine Mammal Parks and Associations, etc. And we will get those names and support out there. So thank you.
Colleen, thank you. That was awesome, and it's a perfect precursor to Jim Waddell's next talk. You guys might all know Jim from the fantastic movie Damnation. If you have not seen Damnation yet, it's kind of like a must-see movie. I encourage everyone to watch that film. Jim formerly worked for the Corps of Engineers, and essentially, like myself and some of the other people here, became a whistleblower, did a study on the lower Snake River dams and made some recommendations that ended up causing his separation from the Corps, but he's works tirelessly in an effort to explain why these dams should come down. They don't make sense economically. They hurt the entire Northwest ecosystem, and a lot of people would benefit if these lower 4 Snake River dams were taken down. Jim, is that accurate? Pretty accurate? Yeah? I just didn't want to make a mistake. This is an important talk and a perfect follow-up to Colleen's piece. Thanks, Colleen. Appreciate that. Yeah, but
Sorry, it's focusing. There we go. Doing panorama. Awesome. All right. Back, and I'll collect them during the break. And put designated person in the back row. Yes.
I just had a